Good day to you. This is Philosophy Roulette 100. I was wondering if I'd have like some sort of announcement on 100, but I don't. It's just sort of shocking I got here. I was doing a lot when quarantine started. I've slowed down slightly, but this is the 100th. Well, actually, no. I forgot number 16. So this is technically the 99th paper, but whatever. So that's what we do. We get papers, we read them, and review them. Please send me any suggestions you have, because that's cool too. It's always fun to get a recommended article. But otherwise, I just look at what's new and pick something and read it. Acta Biotheoretica. Let's see what they have. Let's try the forthcoming. I'm a little worried about Acta Biotheoretica because sometimes they're technical. Oh, they don't have page numbers on their forthcoming. Shucks. Nope, that's not it. Well, that's enough for me just not to look at Acta Biotheoretica right now. That's too bad. Agriculture and Australasian Journal of Logic. This is open access, so let's take a look at what they have. I mean, if they have something that's not all just symbols, I can read it. Revisiting McKinsey's syntactic analysis. That's proof. Special issue. Roger Goldblatt. Modal Meinongianism and object theory. Okay, so we can look at that. And yeah, see, the problem is I don't know the page numbers here. Oh, it's Graham. Okay. Grounding rules and hyper-episomorphic formulas. Let's see. Yeah. It's Filippo, Anoia, Francesco Berto. Let's see how many pages this is. $21. Not gonna read this because it will take all day. Let's see how bad it looks. If I could have read it. Yeah, this is yeah, this amount of formulas would have been okay, but I can't read. 21 single space pages would have put me at like close to 2 hours, so I would lose my mind. And nobody wants that. That's too bad. Alright. Yeah, see 70, yeah. Well, that's unfortunate. Okay, so no AJL at the moment. Biological theory, bioessays. Yeah, see, this looks like science. Ooh, a lot of biology and philosophy today. So let's see what biology and philosophy has. See how many pages this is, if it's available. Oh, this is a critical notice. Too bad. What mirror self-recognition tells us about aspects of the self? Adaptiveness and adaptation, autonomy. Alright, so we'll see if these are available. Oh wow, this doesn't even have links to it. No. This is not the right link. Alright. Oh, I tried to get this before. How do you like that? Failed before. Okay. On to biological theory. Let's see what they have forthcoming. Oh, I fear this is another one of those very small font journals. Alright. 1 to 4. Here we go. I can handle that. Please be available now. Let's try again. That got me very excited for a second. Portuguese. That I wanted to read this paper too. Such is life. All right, Cartesian. Let's go 1 to 14. Scares me in length, but hey, let's see if it's available. Ooh, open access. Yeah, I'm not doing 14 double, this double column stuff, that's closer to 28, so. I am going to go back to thought very soon. We did some analysis yesterday, I'm going to go to thought. I warn you, fill papers, if I can't get anything in the next minute or two. What is this? Why am I skipping it? Oh, is it complexity again? Yeah, complexity publishes a lot, but it's too many numbers for me to read off a page. Contemporary political theory. Here we go. Good government and democracy. Okay. Ali Aslam. Let's see what this is. It looks like a looks like an editorial, but whatever. It's a review. Okay. Oh, I did this one right here. This sexual assault was incarceral feminism. It was a good paper. Let's see what's forthcoming though. Naming violence review. Queer terror settler colony. Don't know what that is. Yeah, we don't have page numbers again, so. Oh, here we go, getting some. Just a multi-species lens. Let's see what else. Ethics of drone warfare. Yeah, let's do the ethic and good guy with a drone. Well, this is gonna be. Oh no, it's a review. Yeah, so. I got all excited. What is this? Wow, 1 to 55. That was misleading. Yeah, I don't know if you can see, but up here it says 55. So, can't seem to find a nice paper right here, but we will continue to get something, and I will go back to thought soon, because I did analysis yesterday. Wait, what happened here? Did I... Oh, yeah, this is another review. Okay, I'm done with contemporary political philosophy because I can't seem to find anything quickly. Let's see, what else is available? Developing world bioethics. Try them. Turning 20. Oh, cute. What is this, a one-page article? Alright, I'm going to check it out just to see if it's available and then do something else after it if it, It's a note. Let's see. Oh, okay, so it's a letter to the editor. Alright, not gonna be a letter to the editor. I was like, that would be amazing. A one-page philosophy paper. I mean, Gettier would be proud. Let's see what this one says. March 2021. So much for that. Okay, as I say, if anyone's out there wants to send me something to read so I don't have to search through the paywalls, I'd love to read something with no paywall. Educational philosophy and theory. Alright. Ooh, so philosophy of science. I always like philosophy of science. Okay, so let's see. Non-word and non-self. Resistance to duality and regime school accountability. I don't know. This is 12 pages. Let's see if I can get it. Nope. Try European Journal of Philosophy. Science. On metaphysically necessary laws, always fun topic. Let's see, anything else? Principle. I used to know what the principle was. I don't remember what it is right now. Ooh, it's available! And it's 27 pages. Alright, that's it. I'm out of patience. Yeah, I give it about a 10-minute shot for finding something, but if I can't do it, I don't want to sit here all day looking for stuff. I just go to a place where alright, see if they have anything new. Unfortunately, I've read most of these now, too. Perceiving Indeterminately. Bence. Did I do this yet? I have no idea. See if it's available. Jeez, it's here. There we go. No, I have to hope this is something I haven't read yet. Because I know I've done Bence Nanay's stuff before. I don't think so. Okay, so that's what it's going to be. Alright, so let me get the data up. The link to this page is now in the chat. You can always type !paper and the link will pop back up. Okay, so, and we're off. Oh, whoa, what was that? Introduction. You wake up and it's dark outside. It is getting gradually lighter, and the way you perceive the objects in your room also changes gradually. Does it? Or are they just getting lighter? I mean, is that the way I perceive, or is that how I look? It's already making assumptions right here. Okay, keep going. Suppose that you're looking at a scarlet dress on your chair. If it's dark outside and the light is not on, you may see the outlines of the dress, but not a lot of color information will get into your visual system. So you perceptually represent the color of the dress in a very indeterminate manner. But as there is more and more light in the room, your perception changes. You perceptually represent the dress differently. First as reddish, then maybe as bright red, and finally as scarlet. I'm not sure if that's exactly what happens, but we'll take his word for it for now. So your perceptual representation of the dress's color changes. The question is how we can describe this change. One recent and influential response is that we should borrow the concept of confidence from the theory of probability in order to do so. The proposal is just that as beliefs or partial beliefs represent their objects with a certain confidence, perceptual states also represent their objects with a certain confidence. Just as we can be more or less confident about whether we will get tenure, we can be more or less perceptually confident about the color of the dress on the chair at dusk. In short, perceptual states assign a certain probability to the state of affairs they represent. My aim is to question this picture and replace it with a much simpler one, where what changes as the room gets lighter is that my perceptual state attributes more and more determinate color properties, and also more determinate properties of other kinds. Alright, so whoa, why did it do that? Determinate. We're going to have to figure out what determinate means to the dress. I agree with the perceptual confidence approach that there is something indeterminate about perception, but while they take the attitude, or more rarely the content, to be probabilistic, I argue for an alternative according to which the content of perceptual states is indeterminate inasmuch as the content involves determinate properties. As we have independent reason to assume that perceptual states represent determinable properties, this way of accounting for the indeterminate nature of perceptual states is preferable on grounds of simplicity. Alright, so I think he may have shared some of my disagreement with the way that initial setup was. So we're going to have to see how Bence spells it out. Epistemologists make a distinction between beliefs and partial beliefs, or credences. Beliefs represent with 100% certainty. Partial beliefs represent the world probabilistically. Perception also represents the world. But do perceptual states, just as beliefs, represent with 100% certainty, or do they, like partial beliefs, represent probabilistically? And how can we decide? One important consideration here, besides the somewhat questionable reliance on introspection, is an epistemic one. See especially Munton. Perception can justify beliefs, but perception can also justify partial beliefs. If a perceptual state justifies a partial belief that represents probabilistically, then there are two options. If the perceptual state does not represent probabilistically, then there seems to be a mismatch between the two mental states, the non-probabilistic perceptual state and the probabilistic partial belief state. Probability is somehow put in as much part of the process of perceptual justification. The other option is that both the perceptual state and the particular partial belief represent probabilistically. Alright, let me just pause real quickly. Why does it keep doing that? Interesting. I just wanted to change the highlight color. I didn't want to switch around. This probably somehow part of the process. This actually happens quite a bit. People add probability things. I don't really know how this happens a lot. People just throw probability, and you have to be, when someone does this, you have to be wary. So this is a very good point on the part of the author. In this case, there is no mismatch. The probabilistic perceptual state justifies the probabilistic partial belief. On the face of it, these epistemic considerations should give us at least some prima facie reason to conclude that perceptual states represent probabilistically. A major assumption that this argument relies on is that perceptual states are propositional attitudes. Not everyone does it, apparently. So both perceptual and partial belief amount to an attitude towards a proposition. The attitude is different perception versus partial belief, but the proposition is of the same kind. If the perceptual state is an attitude towards a proposition that the dress has a certain color property, and the partial belief is an attitude towards the proposition that the dress has a certain color property, then we can use simplicity considerations about how this color property shows up in the proposition the perceptual state represents, and how this is related to the color property that shows up in the proposition the partial belief represents. So I guess this would mean that if they're both related to the same proposition, it's somehow that beliefs and perceptual states are of just different types of mental phenomenon, but they're basically the same sort of thing, or they're being represented as the same sort of thing under this scheme. Okay. And it is important to note that the proponents of the perceptual confidence approach all seem to assume that perceptual states are propositional attitudes. Morrison takes perceptual states to consist of the propositional content and the probability distribution. The propositional content is the dress at dusk example is that the dress is scarlet. And the probability distribution at the beginning of the time frame assigns a lower probability to this proposition than at the end. Jesse Munson is also very explicit in that scenarios like the one with the dress, what changes about our perceptual state is the probability distribution. Our perceptual state has the same content, but different probability assigned to this content. So, I mean, if you've got like a one of those, color illusions, so you're assigning probabilities, you could be at like near 100% certainty about it, but be completely wrong because that's the whole point of the illusion. So I wonder I'm sure they have something to say about that. It's like favorite sort of example on these people. But I mean, it just seems a little odd because it would then mismatch the probability and the proposition. You'd just be wrong. I guess they would call that just it'd be a simple case of being wrong, mistaken for some reason. There'd be a mismatch between your perception, the value given by the perceptual proposition that you're assigning, giving the perceptual proposition and the belief, or something like that. Anywho, what I take to be the core claim of the perceptual confidence approach is not that perceptual states represent indeterminately, but a very specific account of how they do so. They represent the probability distribution of various different propositions. They assign a certain probability to the proposition that the dress is scarlet, and another probability to the proposition that the dress is crimson, and so on. In other words, in these versions of the perceptual confidence account, probability shows up in the attitude, not the content. Yeah, that's what they're assigning weights to their perceptual states. The content is not probabilistic at all. That's what I was just saying above, that when you're fooled about something, you have 100% confidence in it. It is the proposition that the dress is scarlet. The perceptual states assign different probabilities to these non-probabilistic propositions. In the original Scarlet Dress at Dusk scenario, the content of the perceptual state is the same throughout, but our perceptual state attributes different probability to this content. My alternative is that indeterminacy shows up in the content of perceptual states, not in their attitude. This is the perceptual content it is the perceptual content that is indeterminate. This is it in itself would not be a completely new proposal. Sarah Moss suggested in passing that perceptual content is probabilistic, thus indeterminate. From Moss 2018. So that's recent though. But her focus is on beliefs, and she only mentions perception briefly and tentatively without committing to the view that perceptual states have propositional content. And John Morrison's official line is that he is neutral between the attitude and the content view. About whether perceptual states attribute probabilities to the non-probabilistic content or probabilities showing up in the content. My aim is to argue that perceptual states have indeterminate content in a very specific sense, and one that is very different from the claim that they have probabilistic content. They represent determinable properties. Alright, so he has to go on to define what he means by determinable properties here. According to the attitude view, the propositional content of the perceptual state that X is F. Okay, whatever X and F are. But the probability assigned to this proposition is, say, 70%. According to the content view Morrison considers, and Moss explores without endorsing, the propositional content of the perceptual state is that there is a 70% chance that X is F. This is the sense in which the content is probabilistic, and in this sense, it might, as Morrison suggests, be equivalent to the claim that the attitude is probabilistic. Okay, yeah, because X is F would be, I guess, a bivalence, true or false, that X is F, but you have a 70% chance of whatever you assign the truth or the falsity to X being F. My view aims to do justice to the more general claim that perception is indeterminate without appealing to probability either in the attitude or in the content. The perceptual content is that X has a determinable property, a determinable of Fness. A determinable of Fness. Okay. And a simple and straightforward way of cashing out what that means is by appealing to the distinction between determinable and determinate properties. Okay, so that's why we're using Scarlet, because they have Scarlet is in the example from Red and determinably red. Perceiving determinables. My claim is that what happens in the Dress at Dusk scenario is that our perceptual state attributes more and more determinate color to determinate color properties to the dress. My perceptual state does not represent probability distributions, it represents determinable properties. Property types can be more or less determinate. Metaphysicians often use the determinable-determinate relation to describe this. Being red is a determinable of being scarlet, but being red is also a determinant of being colored. This is to say that being scarlet is one way of being red. Being crimson is another way of being red, and being red is one way of being colored. So yeah, this is sort of like type tokens breakdown here, but it's you got one out of a class, and so you can the determinable you can being red is a determinable of being scarlet. So if you're scarlet, you're red, and so but being red is a determinant of being colored. The determinant is the individual. The determinable is the more general class. Okay. We get a hierarchical ordering of property types from very determinate property types, like being colored, to very determinate property types, like having a very specific shade of crimnate. So so you get a tree of some sort. Determinates without further determinants, if they exist, are called superdeterminates. Determinables without further determinables, if they exist, are called superdeterminables. It is important to emphasize that the determinable-determinate relation is not the same as the genus-species relation. Kind of looks like it though. Importantly, magnitudes come in various degrees of determinacy. A range of magnitudes that fully contains a smaller range could be thought of as the determinable of the latter. In fact, if we think of color representation as magnitude representation in a three-dimensional quality space, where the three dimensions are hue, saturation, and brightness, red is a determinable of scarlet precisely because of the range of magnitudes that marks red fully contains the smaller range of magnitudes that marks scarlet. Yeah, it's like a subset. It is not possible to have a determinable property without having a determinant of this determinable property. It is not possible to be red simplicator without being red either scarlet or crimson or whatever. While it is not possible for something to be red simplicator without being either scarlet or crimson or whatever, it is possible to represent something as red simplicator without representing it as either scarlet or crimson or whatever. I can represent the dress you bought as red if all you told me about it was that it was red, without representing it as having any more determinate color properties of being red. Okay, yeah, so you can stop at the more general level. And that's fine. We have plenty of empirical evidence that perception represents determinable properties. In fact, anywhere outside the fovea, we can only have very determinable perceptual representations. Vision in the periphery can attribute only very determinable properties. And even stimulus in the fovea is mostly represented in a determinable manner. In other words, knowing what we know about perceptual systems, we have independent reason to hold that perceptual states can represent determinate or determinable properties, and they often can only manage to represent determinables. The perceptual representation of determinables needs to be part of any empirically informed account of perception. It is not something we need to postulate as an extra feature. Okay, so this is an empirical argument saying, it's not arguing for this philosophically outside of saying, look, this is just how things are. Like, we have evidence that this is what we do. I'm sure there are metaphysical arguments that could be used for the same purpose, but maybe not with the same outcome. But this is an interesting bit. This is like bringing in some empirical evidence to say, look, this is how we do stuff, and so we have to use this distinction because this is actually how we do it. Now, there would be a question of even the stimulus in the fovea is mostly represented by determinable manner. I mean, exactly where this is making a metaphysical claim, though, where like color vision gets determined, and not like where color vision gets sort of understood. And it's saying it gets understood somehow in this different sort of perceiving process in this part of the fovea, or a part of like only in the sort of like side of your eye stuff that makes a difference for how we are perceiving. And so this is making claims already about where the real critical part of the perception of color is happening. So I don't like, this is building in some metaphysics right here and is doing it empirically. So it's an interesting sort of way to go, and I'm sure that's sort of where it looks like this is going to force the argument in the way Bence wants it to go, well, the author wants it to go. All right. Further, taking perceptual states to represent a variety of determinable and determinate properties has important explanatory advantages. See more trying to support this thesis about where the color attribution is coming from. The first one comes from understanding perceptual attention. Attention increases or attempts to increase the determinacy of represented property. If I am attending to the color of my office telephone, I attribute very determinate, arguably superdeterminate properties to it. If, as it is more often the case, I am not attending to the color of my office telephone, I attribute only determinable properties to it, of say being light colored and maybe just being colored. I mean, I don't know if I attribute stuff when I'm not attending to them. What is the attending relation? But that's actually a big topic. People argue about that. Okay. Blurry vision, a darling of bespectacled philosophers of perception, is another important application of determinate distinction in the context of perceptual representation. What happens in blurry vision is the perceptual attribution of determinable spatial location properties. This is different from peripheral vision inasmuch as only the representation of spatial location properties that is determinable, not, for example, the color property. This view should not be confused with Michael Tye's explanation of blur as the failure to comment. Blurry vision does not comment, but it comments on a determinable manner. Okay. Yeah, so again, this is another example supporting the determinate thesis that is being pushed at the moment. The final advantage of this theoretical framework comes from the debate around intentionalism. Intentionalism is the view that perceptual phenomenology supervenes on perceptual content. It has become an important tenet of naturalistic approach to the mind. According to the general naturalistic approach, if we can explain perceptual content, then assuming that intentionalism is true, we are almost done explaining perceptual phenomenology as well. The most important counterexamples to intentionalism come from two phenomena discussed above, attention and blurry vision. The first counterexample is this. Two perceptual states have the same content. If the allocation of attention is different, the phenomenology is also different. If you are looking at two spots against a black background, a red on the left and a green on the right, you attend to the red one and then you shift your attention to the green one. Your perceptual content is the same, but as your attention changes, your phenomenology also changes. So like over here, so there's this green box over here on the left. You can see the green box, and then there's this like red stuff up over here. So you could see both of them looking at the screen, but apparently what they're saying, the phenomenology changes as your attention changes, even if you're not like really looking at one or the other. Okay. Same content, different phenomenology. We have a counterexample to intentionalism. If we think of attention as a matter of the determinacy of represented properties, then this argument fails to go through. The content of these two perceptual states is not the same. One attributes more determinate properties to the red spot, this stuff up here, and red spot, and the other one the more determinate properties to the green stuff over to your left. As perceptual content is at least partially constituted by the sum total of represented properties, these two perceptual states have very different content as attributed properties differ in the degree of determinacy, not a counterexample to intentionalism. Okay, so here is the author is now starting to use the distinction to argue for the thesis here, so it's still going with the intentionalism. The second counterexample comes from blurry vision. Seeing a fuzzy contour sharply and seeing a sharp contour or blurrily have the very same content but different phenomenology. A counterexample to intentionalism. A counterexample to intentionalism. But do these two perceptual states have the same content? No, as long as we think blurry vision as attributing determinate spatial location properties. Seeing a fuzzy contour sharply attributes determinate spatial location properties to the fuzzy contour. But seeing a sharp contour blurrily attributes a determinable spatial location properties to a sharp contour. Again, not a counterexample to intentionalism. Yeah, so if you're seeing blurrily, then you don't actually know where the thing is. But if you're seeing a blurry thing sharply, then you know exactly where the blur is, because the blur is very specific. Whereas the edge and when you're not seeing well, you don't know exactly where the edge is. You only can see the blur. So it's either you know exactly where the blur is, or you know exactly where the edge is, because those are the, I guess you could say, the de Ray properties there. The object itself, not how you are representing it, or the phenomenology of it. Okay. So, let's see, how many more pages is this? Yeah, 6 of 9. Okay, almost done. In short, we have independent reason to postulate that perception can attribute more or less determinate properties, and this fact helps us to explain some puzzling facts about attention and blur, and also helps us to defend intentionalism. But it also helps when it comes to perceptual uncertainty in a way that is much more economical than perceptual confidence approach. What happens in the dress at dusk scenario is that we attribute increasingly determinate color properties to the dress. First, we attribute a very determinable property. We see the dress as reddish, then a somewhat determinable property, red, then a somewhat determinate property, bright red, and finally a quite determinate property, scarlet. All we need to postulate for this explanation are determinable and determinate color properties, which we have an independent reason to postulate. We do not need to postulate complex mental entities such as representation of properties, distributions, and the assignment of various probabilities to various propositional contents. On the face of it, this is a major advantage of my approach. In the next section, I give a fuller comparison between the determinate approach and the perceptual confidence approach. Okay, so now we get to the point. This is Bence's theory here, this one with the determinable determinate, and he's going to argue that it's just better than the other way to go forward. Okay. I mean, frankly, if you're going, one of the best advice I got when I was an undergrad was that if you're going to argue with philosophers, you have to get them early, because once they get going, it's game's over. They're not going to mess up once they've got themselves off the ground. So basically, all the philosophy that could be argued at this point, because Bence is not going to make a mistake, is above is above this point. You have to argue with something that happened above here, because I'm sure that it's been set up to work out the way Bence wants. Otherwise, the paper wouldn't have gotten written. So it's like, I've said this before, these people are very smart. If you're thinking something, it's because they want you to be thinking it. And so this is the whole point, is they've got this whole setup, and then they're going to just hit you with the punchline, which is, this is the right way to go. And so that's what's going to happen here. So, good setup in the paper, I should say. It's well organized. One reason for preferring the determinate view of perceptual uncertainty is that it can explain the changes of our perceptual state without postulating any extra features of perceptual states. We have independent reason to postulate the perceptual representation or more or less determinate properties. You gotta kind of love this. You can see this block of perceptual right here. Okay. And that is all that is needed for the determinate view to work. The perceptual confidence approach and confidence needs to postulate the representation of probability distributions. My account does not need to postulate anything new. Well, you're postulating a new distinction here. The view that probability exists could easily be defended, I'd go with. Because this was argued for above, that they added in the probability distributions. Well, you could argue that they're begging the question by doing that, but they could also argue that, well, everyone is way too causally oriented. Everything is probabilistic in our world, and so the fact that we were ignoring that is they're being more resolute about how to understand probability. Very little is certain, and so the fact that there's probability built in may not be such a bad thing. Okay, but I'm probably wrong about that one, but it's just something, I could actually wonder if there's a footnote on this. But here is a potential objection to the determinate approach. A version of this objection is raised in Morrison. When I see the dress get dusk, not all possible colors look equally likely. It does not seem to me that all possible colors or all possible shades are equally probable. It is more likely that there's a bell curve-like distribution of probabilities, with one shade getting the highest probability assignment. And this is what the top of the bell curve would correspond to. But would such bell curve distribution be consistent with the determinable determinant approach? The worry is that attributing a determinable property entails all the possible determinants of this determinable are equally likely. This is an important worry, but one that is based on a misunderstanding of what it means to represent determinable properties. So, I mean, it's like saying, well, if you've got a subset of things and it's more likely to be some of them, why are you representing it as a just sort of a equally likely subset of things? If there's some spots that are going to be much higher and likely, so there should be further distinctions within this. Okay. We have seen that representing a determinable property does not in general entail representing any determinant of this determinable property, while having a determinable property does entail having a determinant of this determinable. However, sometimes it does. Take the following example. Okay, so he's just conceding here? Well, maybe. If I tell you that my armchair is red and I ask you to visualize my armchair, your imaginative episode attributes the determinable property of being red to my armchair. But what does this attribution of determinable property amount to? Does this imaginative episode represent all possible determinants as being equally likely? No, it tends to represent some determinants as more likely than others. I have seen armchairs before, and some shades of red are more often represented among them than others. So there is no prima facie reason to assume that representing a determinable property entails that all the determinants of this determinable are represented as equally likely. In fact, there is a prima facie reason to hold that representing a determinable which amounts to a bell-shaped-like representation of determinants, which depends on our previous exposure, in the case of the present example, and our previous exposure to armchairs. And the same goes for the perceptual case. When I see the red dress at dusk, not all possible determinant shades of the determinable color property seem equally likely. Some will seem more likely than others, depending on the determinant color of the reddish dress I have been exposed to. In short, it does not follow from my view that all determinants of the represented determinable property appear equally likely. I am not a fan of using phenomenological considerations when debating about the nature of perception, but the phenomenological considerations Morrison brings up are equally consistent with the perceptual certainty view and mine on my own account. I'm a little worried about this, actually. It does seem, this is what I said, that there's especially Bayesian approaches to vision sciences. That footnote is kind of what I was talking about. And what I'm worried about here is that if you have some sort of built-in sort of more likelihood of certain colors as being the likely ones, it means that there is some sort of something in your head that is doing some work to affect how you understand the color stuff you're seeing. And that's not what's being said here, really. It's being said, well, when you see stuff, you're getting a determinable and a determinant thing. But if you're also having some sort of mental process or some sort of background knowledge that affects that, well, then it looks like there's more going on. So, the author is just sort of like saying, well, sure, there's more stuff going on, and you have experience and history in that goes into this stuff, but it does seem to complicate the story here in some way. And I'm not sure that's what this is. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it doesn't follow that everything. So the author here, did I read this last one? When I just all determined shades are equally likely. Okay, so well, why is it not equally likely? It seems that then the story here is not complete about what's going on. I'm not a fan of using phenomenological consideration when debating about the nature of perception, but the phenomenological consideration Morrison brings up are equally consistent with this perceptual certainty view and my own account. Okay, so basically, this is one of those, well, you can't accuse me of this because everyone has a problem, you have a problem too. And that's fair enough, given if this is a more general problem. That's a reasonable defense against the fact that there is more structure than is being described by the theory, but that doesn't make the theory given here wrong. It just means it's incomplete, but this is stuff for further work, and it'd be the same if for everybody's further work. How this actually comes into play is going to be interesting. Okay, let's finish up. Conclusion. The examples of perceptual certainty can be explained fully in the terms of this determinable, determinate economy of the perceptual system. There is no need to posit sui generis, extravagant representations of probability distributions. Extravagant. Wow. We can explain all that needs to be explained about examples like the dress at dusk scenario with the help of the perceptual representation of determinable properties. Okay. That's it. Okay, nice article. Like I said, organized well, so it's well argued, and that's hard to do sometimes, especially with complicated topics like this. Because sometimes it's a little too well argued, in some sense. I worry, just this last little bit made me think that, look, maybe the determinable, determinate, this distinction here is building in some sense, the stuff that's happening in the other theories. And so that's something that happens in philosophy. I'm not saying that's what happened here. I'm just saying this is a worry that just popped into my head, and I'd have to think about it a bit more. But all this stuff that the author is saying, oh, I've covered that here. Well, have you just replicated it? Is it recapitulated in some? Is it just metaphysically recapitulated in this distinction? I don't know. But like when things work out too nicely, maybe I'm just being cynical. But usually there is no, things ain't that neat, nothing that clean. So I'd just be a little worried about that, because the idea that there's extravagant representations of probability distributions might not be so extravagant, and it may just like this stuff that we just explained here, there's already going to be some sort of probability distribution of what is more likely within the determinable, determinate understanding. So it's one of those, well, and then the author did say, well, you have this already, or you're going to have the same problem, but then they don't have it twice. They have it once. They already have the probability built in, and I'd be a little worried then if I was the author, because if they have to have the more likelihood bell curve anyway, then they're going to need to deal with some maybe less extravagant probability distributions, but they're not getting away from it. Okay, so that said, it seems like I said, they set this up well. The distinction that they made is probably as they said it was, but I mean, I don't know enough of the literature to really criticize this distinction, but it looks good. So, nice paper. Seems like they have a good point about don't postulate extra probability when you don't need to. And of course, I'm just worried that nothing ever happens in philosophy. Anyway, that's it for now. Hope you have a good day. Stay safe, anyone. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, something for me to read so I don't have to waste 10 minutes looking for a paper, please send it in. Thank you, and stay safe, folks.